continuing the 1.5 video, so we're picking up at problem 4B and moving into the guided practice. So we said when you're solving your absolute value, you have to isolate the bars. So I'm going to start by undoing this 8 that was a positive, subtracting everything else. So to undo that, you need to subtract it. Since it was a positive 8, we move it by subtraction. So that was step 1. Our second step is to undo this multiplication with -3 by dividing it off of the absolute value. No distributing. So now we're at the point where our isolation is done. The absolute value bars are alone. We can set up 2 equations where the absolute value drops out and equals the given constant 10. Then the absolute value k drops out, but now it equals the -10. So remember, we always use equation 1, we keep the constant positive, and then we turn it to a negative in equation 2. But I don't have any more solving to do because the k is completely isolated at this point. So if I plug 10 back into the problem, it should equal -22. So 8 minus 3, absolute value of 10 is still 10, and 8 minus 30 does in fact equal -22. I can check again with -10, but when I take absolute value of -10, it's still going to be positive, and now I'm at the same step that I was before, and it would be true. For the guided practice, we're going to keep going with that. I'm not going to give as much explanation each time. Here I can immediately set up my 2 equations because the absolute value is isolated. But remember in the second equation to change the constant to a negative, whatever's on the right side of the equation. One thing that Mr. Hill has brought up to help some students before I get going here, if you have absolute value bars, remember there's 2 bars, one on the left and one on the right. So when you see 2 absolute value bars, you should be thinking solve 2 equations, which means you're going to have 2 solutions. So if that helps you, use it. 2 bars means 2 equations means find 2 solutions. And that's what we're in the process of doing here on number 1. So I'm going to subtract 1 using the subtraction property, and the division property gets me to my first solution. Over here, I'm going to use my subtraction property with 1. I'm going to divide by 4 using the division property, and then I need to reduce my fraction. If I divide both of my numbers by 2, I get my smaller fraction of -3/2. If you worked this out on your own and tried to change your decimal to a fraction, you would have gotten -1.5, which is also an acceptable answer. For number 2, before I can get my 2 equations, I have to isolate the variable in the absolute value, which is now completed. So my first equation, drop the n, it equals the positive constant. In my second equation, drop the n, and it will equal the negative constant. I have no more work to do because it's just n. For problem 3, I need to undo the addition first. So that's my subtraction property. And now I can undo the multiplication by dividing 9. Now that the absolute value is isolated, I can solve 1 equation, dropping out the absolute value and leaving the constant positive, and a second equation, drop out the absolute value, and solve the constant that's negative. But again, quick steps because there's nothing else to do to solve for n. It's already completely alone. Number 4. The absolute value is isolated. And now I can set up 2 equations. Drop out the absolute value equal to a positive Second problem, we're going to drop out the absolute value but set it equal to the negative. If I subtract 8 in the first equation, my answer is positive 8. If I subtract 8 in the second equation, my answer is negative 24. Finally, for number 5, to isolate the absolute value, you need to subtract 7 from both sides using the subtraction property. 6 minus 7 leaves me with negative 1. Because I have equals a negative number, this has no solution. Once you have that absolute value isolated and it's equal to something negative, you immediately call it no solution. And that wraps up the absolute value notes for solving 1 and 2-step equations that use absolute value. So that's target 1.5. At this point, you should be able to do the odds from day 6 worksheet, and then you're expected to end up doing the evens after we take the quiz the following day. So at some point, plan on day 6 being completely done. First day of it, just do the odds. And then don't forget to go back to day 5 and try out some more word problems. So my suggestion today is try number 3 and 8.